Jody Lightfoot is a musical student at the prestigious Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts and is a young Australian who is very actively involved in the Global Poverty Project as its presenter, as well as having been the WA campaign manager of the Oaktree Foundation. He is deeply passionate about fighting extreme poverty in developing countries. The Global Poverty Project continues to be one of the most recognisable and enthusiastic organisations in Australia, aiming to end extreme poverty worldwide. Recently, the Global Poverty Project was involved in the End of Polio campaign last year, leading to the Australian government pledging a whopping $50 million towards the eradication of this disease through vaccination and other causes. Jody will be presenting 1.4 billion reasons this year. Please welcome Jody Lightfoot.
We're going to begin with a bit of an introductory video that just shows a little bit about what the Global Poverty Project does around the world.
One of my dreams is to see a world where people don't have to lack anything, where every child goes to school, where everyone can have access to medical services, where there's no difference between a man and a woman in terms of participation. It's a world where there is no poverty anymore.
The vision of the Global Poverty Project is a world without extreme poverty within a generation. We aim to engage, inspire and equip you with the tools you will need to take action, and in doing so we will demonstrate that the smallest efforts, when combined with the efforts of others all over the world, really will make a major difference. By increasing the number and effectiveness of people working toward the same goal, you can be part of a global movement that can see an end to extreme poverty within a generation.
Can anyone tell me what Mercy's 5 dreams were at the start of that video? Does anyone remember dream number 1? There's a world where people don't lack anything. How about dream number 2? Yep, where every child goes to school. Number 3? Yep, access to medical services. How about number 4? Yeah, no difference between a man and a woman in terms of participation. And how about the final one? A world where there is no poverty anymore. I'd like to pose to you a question, and that is, what kind of words and images do you think when you hear the word poverty? Anyone like to kick it off?
Hunger.
Hunger. Yep. No money.
Death.
Death. Yeah, absolutely. And so quite often when we think of extreme poverty, a lot of negative words and images come to mind. And throughout this presentation, we're actually going to be moving away from these images because we're wanting to focus on the hope that we have to make a difference and see more smiles on kids like Aziz all around the world. Well, my role today is to share with you a vision of a world without extreme poverty in it and how each of us can contribute to that reality. And I'd like to begin by sharing a bit about my own story and how I came to be wanting to take action on this issue. Well, for me, I went to the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts and I studied the drums there. And my lifestyle was basically waking up in the morning, playing the drums all day, just about every day, and I absolutely loved it. About halfway through university, I went to a conference, and the theme of the conference was on justice. And for me, this was such a turning point in my life because I was deeply challenged and inspired by the speakers there. And I remember being in a room one night at this conference and really thinking, when I'm at the end days of my life, what would I have liked others to have said about what I did with my life? Where would I have liked to have said that I spent my time? And after a lot of time thinking, well, firstly, I have to admit to you, I got a bit distracted and I thought, when I'm that age, I'd love to look like this. But realised more realistically, I might turn out like this. I that reaching out and being able to improve the quality of life for others is just about the most worthy and fulfilling thing that I could ever imagine being a part of. And so I thought, I want to be part of this movement that's taking action on extreme poverty. I also believe this, that the small actions from a lot of people can result in large-scale change. And today, we're going to be looking at 5 key questions in exploring this issue of extreme poverty. Firstly, what does extreme poverty mean? We'll ask, can we actually do anything about it? What are some of the barriers to ending extreme poverty? Why should we care about the issue? And finally, what can we actually practically do? So to start with the first question, what does extreme poverty mean? Well, the World Bank would define someone living in extreme poverty when they live on less than $1.25 US a day. Now, some of you may be thinking that this can buy you a lot more in the developing world than it can in the developed world. And so we did some research and we found that this money can buy you about 2 bowls of rice, with some cooking oil, with some vegetables, with about 10 cents left over for all of life's other expenses, like health and transport and enjoying yourself. And this is the challenge of extreme poverty, because imagine for a moment that you had a family and one of your children got sick and you had to decide whether you were to send your sick child to the doctor, but in the meantime your family went hungry, or do you feed your family and allow your child to get sick? Well, this is the challenge faced by 1.4 billion people in our world today, giving us 1.4 billion reasons to respond immediately. But extreme poverty goes further than just having access to money. It's about having access to our basic human rights, like the right to an education, the right to food, the right to water, to healthcare, to go to school, and for children, the right to be able to play. Because right now there are 1.4 billion people in our world living on less than $1.25 US a day, lacking in basic opportunities and choices. So let's look at, can we actually do anything about it? Well, the answer is yes, and I'd like to begin with some history. In the 1800s, this was the greatest city in the world, but not if you were a child and not if you were poor. It's the city of London. Now, cholera outbreaks killed thousands. In 1848, it killed 14,000 alone. Now imagine for a moment that you actually drank from the same water that you went to the toilet in. Well, this is what the greatest cities in the world were doing at a time when most of the United Kingdom and the rest of the world were living in extreme poverty. And in 1858, when the sun shone down on a river full of feces, the smell got so bad that most of Westminster actually evacuated, including both houses of Parliament. Something had to be done, and so they built the first modern day sewerage system. It worked. The cholera epidemic stopped, child mortality plummeted 29% in a single year, and it gave rise to the kind of living standards that we can begin to see today. But it's not just the Western countries that have seen a remarkable number of people lifted out of poverty. Can anyone tell me where these ramps come from? Yeah. Now, 50 years ago, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. But thanks to the hard work of the people and investments from foreign aid into things like infrastructure, education, and developing a strong manufacturing industry, South Korea in 50 years went from an aid recipient country to an aid giving country. But it's not just the Asian economies that have seen great progress. Does anyone know which country this flag is from? Ghana, you got it. Ghana's a great success story in Africa, and here's a quick video which shows how Ghana are seeing many people lifted out of extreme poverty.
Ghana is peaceful. Ghana is a progressive African country. Poverty has been halved from 50% of the population to just a little over a quarter of the population. HIV prevalence rate has declined from 3.2% to 1.9%. We are practicing democracy, and democracy is working in Ghana. The 2008 election in Ghana was a very close election, and it was still very peaceful. That's just remarkable in Africa's context.
We have shown to the whole Africa that we really
it is rather incredible. It's from the World Bank, and it shows us that in 1981, about 52% of the world were living in extreme poverty. Now bring that to 2005, and that was brought down to just 25%. So what this means is that in the last 20 years alone, we have more than half the proportion of people living in extreme poverty in the world, which is incredible. But this kind of progress hasn't been happening absolutely everywhere. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are more poor now than there were 30 years ago. And so our question becomes, how can we take the 25% of people living in extreme poverty and bring that down to zero? And I'd love to pass it over to you guys for a moment and hear some thoughts about some of the things we might need to do to see that happen.
Low interest loans.
What's that, sorry?
Low interest loans.
Low interest loans, great one. Any other thoughts? Education, huge one.
Affordable healthcare.
Healthcare? Affordable healthcare. Yeah.
Free healthcare.
Free healthcare.
Accessible healthcare.
Corruption.
Yeah, tackling corruption. Well, it's a good thing that we aren't the first people to think about this issue. Has anyone heard of the Millennium Development Goals? Awesome, just about all of us. In the year 2000, the United Nations met together and they formed a plan to halve extreme poverty from the year 2000 to 2015 called the Millennium Development Goals. This was based on a clear, practical, target-led framework focusing on programs and policies that we know historically eradicates poverty. Things like eradicating extreme poverty and hunger. Things like helping farmers to develop in their food productivity. Things like achieving universal primary education, and since 1999, we've put 40 million more kids into school. Does anyone remember what goal number 3 was?
Gender equality.
Yeah, gender equality. Goal number 3 is actually really important. Many economists say that this is the most effective tool for development that we actually have. Because while women account for 50% of the world's population, 3/5 of those living in extreme poverty are actually women and girls. Women perform 2/3 of the world's working hours, but they only earn 10% of the world's income and 1% of the world's property globally. Now this situation has to end for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's the right thing to do and women deserve equal opportunities. And secondly, because, as I mentioned before, it's a policy that's incredibly effective. And I'd like to share with you a quote from Kofi Annan, the former United Nations Secretary General. It even comes with some nice background music. But this is what Kofi Annan said. He said, "There is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. No other policy is as likely to raise economic productivity or reduce infant and maternal mortality. No other policy is as sure to improve nutrition, including the prevention of HIV/AIDS. No other policy is as powerful in increasing the chances of education for the next generation, and I would also venture that no other policy is as important in preventing conflict and achieving reconciliation after a conflict has ended. One of the best ways that we can promote women is getting more girls into school." I'm going to skip now, because of time, to goal number 6, which is combat HIV/AIDS, malaria and other diseases. And a good example of this is the Global Fund. Is anyone across what the Global Fund does? Well, the Global Fund is a United Nations body in which countries like Australia invest into, and they tackle these kind of diseases. And to share with you a little bit about what the Global Fund has done, the Global Fund has distributed 59 million anti-malarial bed nets. And in Rwanda and Ethiopia, there's been a 50% cut in malaria cases in just a 2-year period. Since 2002, 2 million more Africans are on life-saving treatment, and 3 million more worldwide. And we've actually come a long way in reducing the spread of HIV/AIDS by 17% in the last 8 years. Goal number 7 is focused around sanitation and things like clean water. And I'd like to skip to this chart. This chart shows the progress of the Millennium Development Goals over the last 10 years. And we can see that all of them are behind. Whilst that could be discouraging, we see that goals number 1 and 6, for example, are doing reasonably well. And we've seen huge progress. But we've seen goals like goals 4 and 5 way behind. Now we can still have huge progress on these goals by the 2015 deadline, but we need to be working harder and faster if we are to do so. I'd like to pose a question to you and give you guys about 1 minute to have a chat to the person next to you about it. And that is that the United Nations are currently having discussions about the post-Millennium Development Goal framework. And I want you to chat to the person next to you and ask the question, what should be included in the post-Millennium Development Goal framework that isn't there already? And in particular, we're going to look at money, corruption, and trade. So starting with money, where is all this money for development going to come from? Well, it can come from all these different sources: taxes, remittances, business investments, micro-enterprise. We're going to be looking at aid. Because we all know that there is good aid, and then there is bad aid. This is my friend Darcy. He's in the Guatemalan highlands, and I want you to take a look at the screen and tell me if you can see anything a bit unusual about the photo. Not that one. What was that one? It's to do with the whiteboard. Yeah, it's at the back of the classroom. So, a little bit of a story about the whiteboard. The whiteboard was donated by an organisation from the United States. And the same organisation went back to the community a few months later, and they asked the teacher, "Do you like the whiteboard we gave you?" And the teacher said, "Yeah, we love the whiteboard." And the organisation said, "Well, why didn't you use the whiteboard?" And the teacher said, "Well, we did use the whiteboard, it was great." And the organisation said, "Why don't you use the whiteboard now?" And the teacher said, "Oh, you know those special pens? We don't actually get them here." And so this is a small example about how the good intentions of an organisation didn't meet the needs of the community in a sustainable way. Another example of bad aid is that following the 2004 tsunami, our generous aid efforts led to a tsunami of clothing, when what the locals needed most was medicine, water, shelter, and food. And so how do we ensure that we can match our good intentions with good outcomes, ensuring that what we're giving is appropriate, empowering, and leading to positive change. Well, it's about targeting our aid towards the Millennium Development Goal Framework. And has anyone here heard of the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness? Well, the Paris Declaration, basically the world leaders got together and with the question, how can we make aid more effective? How can we deliver aid? And they came up with 5 pillars in which they should use when delivering aid. To give you a few examples of ownership, giving the partner country or community a sense of ownership over the policies and strategies of development. Things like mutual accountability for both partners to ensure that the aid is being effective, and always asking the question, how can we give aid in a way that these communities won't need aid in the future? How can we empower these communities to lift themselves out of extreme poverty? And I'd like to show you an example of good aid now, and that is from an organisation, this is from Plan, and they're working in India, empowering the locals and the youth as well to tackle the issue of open defecation, and that basically means pooing in public. So let's have a look.
Lack of sanitation, open defecation contributes directly to agriculture. Empowering them to analyze their own environment, and when they realize that they are ingesting each other, they immediately jump into action, and the collective decisions are taken, and they stop it. Children do processions, chanting slogans against open defecation. The process moves around the village in the evening or the morning, and some special occasions, until the village becomes open defecation free. And that sends a direct message to everyone. They have their own very innovative ideas, of checking who is still defecating in the open.
In this relentless process, people started hearing the changes, recognizing changes reports, their awareness, and also they are now inviting changes to be part of their development, be part of their decision. Now, if people are feeling shy, they are willing to open defecate, but they are not, because
If you'd like to make a donation to that project, come see us after. I'm just joking. So let's look at the barrier of corruption, because none of us can deny that corruption has been a huge issue for as long as we can remember. We have seen corrupt dictators like Teodorin Obiang, who stole $35 million from the Equatorial Guinea public spending to buy a $35 million house in Malibu, California. And we've seen guys like Bernie Madoff steal $65 billion over 20 years. A Wall Street banker who stole it from investors, one of the largest frauds in human history. The first point I want to make is that corruption happens everywhere, not just the developing world. And it's important that we're doing our part to ensure that we're holding our banks, governments and businesses to account and ensuring that we aren't complicit in corruption. But let's ask the important question, that is, how do we stop corruption? Well, here's a great video. It's got a really respected economist called Paul Collier, and he's going to share with you some of the strategies organisations like Global Witness, putting into place to tackle corruption?
To put it bluntly, corruption is like that. You're losing that and with yourself at the expense of others. You need laws, of course. We are also talking about changing values and attitudes. Values will ensure that people adhere to laws.
Well, of course, the famous example of not enough accountability is the story of education spending in Uganda. The money that the Ministry of Finance released wasn't reaching the schools. And so what they did was they released the information to communities, and over the course of 3 years, that changed things dramatically. Instead of nearly all the money leaking, nearly all the money started to reach the schools. So empowering local people with information makes a huge difference.
If you pay enough attention, for instance, to educating young people about values which enable them to grow up as citizens, they would, for instance, demand more accountability from those who govern them.
In all these societies, there are really brave, dry people fighting for change. And our job is the more modest one, getting behind.
Ask yourselves whether the government is in any way making worse the problem of corruption. And if you feel that there is a problem, then you must insist that the government and companies who may be contributing to this problem should be doing more to address it.
Now, the OECD did, 10 years ago, pass legislation to make it a criminal offence to bribe officials. What we need to do is use it, and the actually not to start prosecuting.
And so some of those strategies that were pointed out, a lot of them were really based around giving the community a voice to be able to empower them to hold their governments to account. Because that creates transparency, and transparency is often said to be the enemy of corruption. And they do that through things like education, providing information to the community. It's also things about adequate pay, because for a lot of workers in the developing world, they're actually working full time, but they're only earning $30 US a month, and making corruption in some cases a matter of survival. It's also about ensuring laws are in place and that there are prosecutions being made. And the final barrier we're going to look at is trade. Because trade is such a powerful thing. China has seen 400 million people lifted out of extreme poverty in the last 30 years. We saw how South Korea went from an aid recipient country to an aid giving country by developing a strong manufacturing industry in 50 years. Botswana has been one of the fastest African countries to grow by wisely investing in their diamond mines. India has seen remarkable progress in lifting people out of poverty by specialising in pharmaceuticals, information technology, and call centres. So one way that aid can play a huge role is by investing into helping communities be able to trade their way out of poverty. And that's helping develop things like credit markets, providing infrastructure and education. And as we reflect on what it would take to see an end to extreme poverty, we can think of the analogy of a bicycle. The wheels of the bicycle is like trade. They move things forward, lifting people out of poverty. The oil of the bike is like good aid. They help the wheels to move smoothly and quickly. And the frame of the bike is like good governance and access to rights, which holds everything together. And when we have trade, good aid, and good governance, poverty falls. And so why should it really matter to us? Well, firstly, I believe it should matter to us because it's the right thing to do. And secondly, it should matter because it's actually in our own best interest when we consider things like conflict and disease. We know that higher rates of conflict and disease occur in conditions of extreme poverty, and then that threatens people all around the world, the health and well-being of people. As Martin Luther King Jr. would put it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we also see that as we invest, Australia as a good example, in our neighbouring countries, and we see their economies grow, our economy prospers too. I want to give 3 reasons for optimism. Firstly, we know what it takes. With more than half the proportion of people living in extreme poverty in the last 20 years, and we have the Millennium Development Goals as a framework to take us into the future. It's actually very affordable. When we compare the amount of money spent on clean drinking water for all, it will cost us $33.3 billion. But contrast that with what we'll pay globally for bottled water, $67.7 billion. Now, when we compare what it will cost to achieve all the Millennium Development Goals, it would be $183 billion per year. Now, compare that with the money that we spent on the global financial crisis bailing out banks and failed car companies. We've created a graph to scale just to show you the difference. And finally, because we can do it together, it's when people who are in extreme poverty are working really hard to lift themselves out. When world leaders and celebrities, when people like you and I, our families, our communities, are all doing our fair share, we'll begin to see large-scale change. And so, the final question for today is, what can we actually do? Well, we've identified 6 ways that we can take action. And I'll go in a little more depth in some of them, but most of them I'm just going to talk over quite quickly because of time. Firstly, it's important to learn about the issues, because the more educated we are, it places us in a position where we can be more effective in creating change. I think it's so encouraging that each of us has a unique opportunity to reach our circles of influence in ways that other people just can't. And with the social media revolution, we can reach people faster and quicker than before. Faster and quicker are probably the same thing. It's also important, well, I've had amazing experiences in volunteering. Has anyone done any volunteering here before? The Oaktree Foundation, one example of a great volunteering organisation. Incredibly fulfilling and exciting to be a part of. I'd encourage each of you to volunteer in Australia and even overseas. Donating and organising fundraisers, a small amount of our money can go a long way, and I think that's an encouraging thought. I want to focus a bit on buying, because the reality is that we are a deeply interconnected world, and the products that we buy will affect people in a positive way or a negative way. And we want to make sure that our products that we're buying doesn't come at the cost of exploited labour at the back of that supply chain. Here's a quick video to illustrate this.
Increasingly, investments by businesses from countries like ours are helping to reduce poverty. Products sold in our shops, like clothes, have a supply chain that stretches back through a warehouse and around the world. This gives us both the opportunity and the obligation to ensure that the investments made by our businesses are ethical, create jobs that pay competitive wages, and have decent conditions. Because the last thing we want is to find out that we're buying from children working in sweatshops.
Does anyone know why we would buy fair trade over, say, a non-certified product? Well, a few reasons. Did you want to? Okay, all good. A few reasons why fair trade, I think, is good is that it ensures that there is no child exploitation. It ensures that there is no slavery-like conditions in the workplace. It also ensures that men and women are getting paid a decent wage and the same wage. And there are many fair trade products that we can buy, especially chocolate, tea, and coffee. And the more we begin to ask our cafes and our supermarkets and organisations to stock fair trade, the more we'll begin to see it. We can buy shirts, sporting equipment, even your own fair trade undies. And the last way that I want to talk about is this concept of shouting or advocating or campaigning, because this is such a powerful thing. When you look at the social movements throughout history, large-scale change comes when people get together, they make a stand, and they raise their voice about their concerns. To give you one example, recently Cadbury announced all their dairy milk chocolate would be made fair trade. Now, this didn't happen by accident. It happened as a result of people campaigning, people sending petitions, emails, campaigning outside the Cadbury factory, and after a while they decided to go fair trade. Another good example is the Global Poverty Project's win on getting the Australian government to invest $50 million to the Eradication of Polio initiative. One thing that I want to highlight tonight is that I think one of the most significant opportunities we have to see Australia do our fair share to eradicate extreme poverty is to hold our leaders to account for the promises we made in line with the Millennium Development Goals. And I'm not sure who's aware, but we recently cut $4 billion worth of promised aid in the last budget, and they felt they could get away with that because they thought that just not enough people would care. And so I really want to encourage you to be meeting your local representatives, to be getting out there and advocating that Australia does our fair share in line with these goals. And if you'd like to host a presentation at your church or community group, come chat to us after. As we look at this presentation, I hope that when you think of extreme poverty, you aren't thinking of negative words and images, but I hope that you're inspired with the hope we have to make a difference. And the last question I'll ask you is, what will you do? Maybe for you it's making a commitment to supporting fair trade over non-fair trade or non-certified products. Maybe it's deciding to organise a fundraiser, or deciding to sign up to organisational databases so you can be informed when upcoming campaigns are coming up. Whatever it is for you, I want to leave you with this final thought, and that is what a remarkable opportunity we have living in Australia, living the life that we get to live with our education, and what an awesome thought that we can take that and then be able to use that to be able to invest in others and improve the quality of life for others. I think that's awesome, and let's seek to see an end to extreme poverty. Thank you.